Hi, everybody. Welcome to the WVHuddle.com Prep Football Podcast on a beautiful day here in downtown Charleston. We're at Adelphia Sports Bar and Grill at 218 Capitol Street, where we've been recording the podcast for most of this season. Glad to be down here. Come on down, get some drinks, get some food, watch some games sometime. But we'll jump right in here. We'll get into what happened last week in prep football. And the big one around here was Herbert Hoover and Sissonville. Big match, not just for, the Cardinal Conference and local bragging rights, but this was not necessarily an elimination game for the playoffs, but maybe so for the team that ended up losing for Sissonville. Herbert Hoover's still very much alive. With only 2 losses, if they run the table, they could end up with a home game even, but back half of the schedule kind of loaded for them. Tell me a little bit of what you're feeling with this Herbert Hoover team this year, because it seems like they've been a little hard to figure out through the first half, but they've got momentum going on their side right now.
Yeah, I think with the last couple of years, everybody watching Sissonville grow under Eddie Smolder, all the attention has been kind of shifted their way. Now, Eddie Smolder left for Ripley, and Mark Wilson is coaching Sissonville now.
He came from South Charleston, correct?
Yep.
He was an assistant on that team that went to those AAA state titles.
Right.
Yep.
And, Sissonville is struggling. In the first year of a new regime, you have that a good bit. You'll maybe take a step back to prepare yourself for another step forward. But Hoover is in a situation where, like you said, the back end of their schedule is pretty loaded. They're in a good position to make a run to the playoffs, though. I mean, they got a big one Friday night with Wayne. I just think with this area being so dominated by AAA teams, it usually takes a while for us to discern what AA team, if any, in this area is really going to emerge. And I think what we're watching right now is Hoover be that team for this year in the area.
Yeah. How's Hoover doing now? I mean, they lost great running back in Sean Dotson. He was our player of the week multiple times last season. There's a lot of production at the running back position that they lost. What are the Huskies doing this year to be able to go on this run?
Tristan Hager's having a great year, really. I had his stats yesterday, over 600 yards rushing, almost 400 passing, kind of seems to be a stabilizing force for their offense. I thought it was a kind of interesting point you brought up Sissonville, and if you'll remember that, that slow 4-year climb they made with Eddie Smolder, the year before they finally broke through and made the playoffs, they were 5-5 and just missed it because they got upset by Braxton County. I think.
Last week of the season.
I think Hoover finished 6-4 last year, actually, right? And just missed it. Just missed it. So it's kind of like the same thing. Now we might be seeing the next step of that growth, like you said.
Thinking of that, this was a topic throughout last season. That opening game that Hoover had last year against Scott, and we said the loser of this is going to be hard pressed to make the playoffs, and that's what happened. Hoover lost that one and ended up right outside.
If memory serves, Hoover blew a lead in that game on the road with Scott. But kind of sticking in Class AA, Ryan, you saw Bridgeport again last week. I think you the unofficial Bridgeport beat writer for the WV Huddle, but we've touched on the Indians in the past, but we're kind of at the point of the season now where we know exactly what Bridgeport's got. There's, of course, some question coming into the season. Can they stay on this roll? They've still got all these players, but they've still got to go out and play the games. Well, it's been pretty much smooth sailing for them so far, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you look at the other classes, I think you could make arguments that maybe Midland, maybe Magnolia, maybe aren't the best team. There's no argument in AA, I don't think. They beat a Kaiser team 38-0, and it would have been cool if Kaiser, they were without Brady Hours, who was injured in the first quarter. That was their quarterback. Roadheaver was suspended, so they had neither one of those guys. And they actually did some good things. Outside of a 90-yard run, Bonamico had 8 carries for 30 yards. Dylan Tonkery in the second half had 6 carries for 0 yards.
Yeah, so they had something going there.
Yeah, they ran 64 plays to 39 for Bridgeport. But at the end of that game, I've covered him 3 times. I've talked to Josh Nicewarner after games 3 times. This is by far the happiest he was. Yeah. Great special teams game, great defensive game. I think he saw his team where they were actually matched with players of the same ability, and they still got the job done in pretty convincing fashion, and I know he was real happy with that. So, easily, the team to beat in Class AA.
Derek, I've known Josh Nicewarner for a couple of years. You've known him a few years longer than I have. What is it about him that seems to be able to get these kids up every year? I know Bridgeport has that tradition, and you hear about, when there's triplets or twins or anything born in Harrison County, they come out the womb running the stick eye. But that transition from the coaches that happened with Bridgeport several years back when Nice Warner took over, that was tradition steeped, and he kind of came in and never really missed a beat with them.
Right.
Well, is there anything particular about his coaching style you think that endears him to being successful like this, or is he's just very good at managing what he's got, no matter what it happens to be?
A little bit of both.
Yeah.
Bruce Carey, I have nothing but good things to think and say about him. But Josh was an assistant under Bruce. I think a big part of that, is that Josh is a Bridgeport graduate. He played there, late 90s. And I think there's an urgency to everything that comes out of Josh toward the program that I don't know that Bruce, being actually a Liberty graduate, necessarily had. And I think it was you that said last week, you hear the name Nice Warner, that's the first thing that comes to your mind is Bridgeport. There's Nice Warners all over the flipping place. And, I think he is an embodiment of that program, and he's making that program an embodiment of him. And I mean, to see his record, and I don't know it off the top of my head, since he took over as head coach, is just astounding.
Yeah. Last game we'll look at from last week before we get into the poll and just a packed week of games coming up this Friday. Game you were at, St. Albans at Parkersburg. Just looking on paper, it's not one that jumps out at you, particularly with as not good as St. Albans has been, and as average or mediocre, I guess, as Parkersburg has been. How has Parkersburg fallen this far? I mean, you kind of understand when a team that has that sort of history and tradition might have a bump in the road, but we're talking 6, 7, 8 years now, and it's never recovered from that. I think it was a big playoff loss at Laidley Field to South Charleston. Yeah, South Charleston put one on them. What was that? 2007, 2008.
I think it was. I was thinking that was 2010.
Okay.
Yeah,
but
that was the week before the hurricane.
Still, it's been the entirety of this decade. Parkersburg has been down, and that's in my lifetime of following high school football in West Virginia. You haven't seen that.
Yeah, a couple streaks with that. Parkersburg hasn't won a playoff game since it beat St. Albans for the 2007 title. Okay, that's a long time for Parkersburg to go without a playoff win. But that loss clinched St. Albans' 8th consecutive non-winning season, which, as long as St. Albans has had football, about 100 years.
Also goes back to that 2007 title game.
Exactly, that was the last time they had a winning season. They haven't had one since. This will be 8 in a row. That equals the longest stretch of non-winning seasons in St. Albans football history. Not a lot of good in those streaks. That said, Parkersburg opened up its season with a brutal stretch of games. Okay, now, its back half, and we were just talking about Hoover's having a tougher back half. Parkersburg's is more conducive to picking up a couple wins, and they still got to play Midland. But I talked recently about this year probably seeing an unprecedented number of 6-4 or even 5-5 teams making the playoffs. I got a feeling that Parkersburg might be 5-4 going into the last game of the regular season, playing Parkersburg South with a playoff spot on the line. And if you're in that area, it doesn't get much better than that, regardless of the record.
No, it doesn't. That game is, one of the big games in the state. If they're both 0-9 going into that, if there's a playoff spot on the line, gosh.
I tell you something else too. That might be a must-win for South by then.
Yeah,
if you look
exactly.
at the rest of their schedule, they might be 5-4 by then.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. Well, we'll close the book on last week. We'll jump into this week's Gazette Mail football poll. As always, we'll start in AAA, go down through the list, and at the top again this week, Cabell Midland. The Knights been number one ever since knocking off Capital about a month ago now. Yep. Received 9 of 10 first place votes. They're off this week, get to rest a little bit for the first time this season, and then they host George Washington the week after that. And it's a tough run for the Patriots here, and we've talked about this. They started with Hurricane last week. This week, number 2 Capital, 5-1 Cougars, defending AAA state champions. They're at George Washington, and that's going to be a wild one up on the hill, I bet. So if you're going up there, get there. We're taping this. We're taping this Wednesday afternoon. I might go up and set up the car up on the hill when we get done here. At number 3, Point Pleasant. We'll get into them a little more as we've tended to do just a little bit every week. Big Blacks got 1 first place vote, undefeated, and they host AA Ravenswood this week. At number 4, George Washington. The Patriots have steadily climbed up the poll from not ranked the first couple weeks of the season to top 5. They're number 4 this week. Patriots are 5-1, as we mentioned, at Capital. At number 5, Martinsburg, another team that fell out of the rankings earlier in the season. Kind of surprised us, but Bulldogs have rebounded after that 0-2 start. They're 4-2 now, and they're at Hedgesville, so a little bit of an Eastern Panhandle rivalry going on out there. Tied at number 5 this week with Martinsburg, Wheeling Park. The Patriots 4-1-1. They host Carrick, Pennsylvania this week. They jumped up from number 8 last week. At number 7, Jefferson. The Cougars are 5-1. Big game for them. Playing against, I know it's AA, but Fairmont Senior, they're number 2 in our poll this week in AA. They've been number 1 the last couple weeks in the SSAC playoff ratings. So big one up there for the Cougars and the Polar Bears. Number 8 in AAA, Huntington, coming off that loss, coming off back-to-back losses to Cabell Midland last week. Their big rival they played last Saturday, and Capital the week before that. That's a tough run for anybody. The Highlanders are 5-2. They are down 1 spot from number 7 last week, and they host Woodrow Wilson. So maybe the Flying Eagles good for what ails the Highlanders right now. At number 9 is South Charleston, the Black Eagles. They host Winfield this week. Sorry, Winfield. Yeah. Just how it goes sometimes when you're in the MSAC. And at number 10, Morgantown. Mohegans 5-2, and Riverside making the trip to Morgantown this week. And that's, we've almost had to mention this every week with the schedule the way it is, but Princeton leaves the MSAC, and that leaves a hole on all of those team schedules, and you see Nitro playing Mingo Central, or Wheeling Park coming to St. Albans, or Riverside going to Morgantown. Yeah. The other teams receiving votes in Class AAA, Parkersburg South, Spring Valley, Brooke, and John Marshall. In Class AA, again, number 1, Bridgeport. Indians receiving all 10 first-place votes. They are 6-0-1 with that no contest tie. Well, really sure the best way to describe that, but it was ruled a tie against Wheeling Park in the first week of the season. Indians at North Marion this week. North Marion is better than they have been the past few years, but that's still asking an awful lot from Darren Hayes' team. At number 2, the previously mentioned Fairmont Senior Polar Bears. They are 6-0 and host Jefferson at East West Stadium in beautiful downtown Fairmont. East West has some age on it, but it's a nice neighborhood that it's in, man. There's that little spot to get a bite to eat across the street from the stadium, and I'm forgetting the name of it, but that was my spot when I was
a grocery store around there too, isn't there?
Yeah, right down the street is like a Save-A-Lot or a Big Bear or something like that. That was where I'd always get my pepperoni rolls when I was up.
You got to drive by Muriel's to get there anyway, so it's all good.
Muriel's and the Polka Dot.
Yep.
I'm sorry, I started thinking about Muriel's and the Polka Dot. I got sidetracked there. We were at number 2 in AA? No, AA. Number 3, Tulsa. The Rebels still holding steady. They're undefeated, 6-0 at Scott this week. I keep kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop with Tulsa, but it hadn't happened yet. They might
happen this week.
No, I don't think so. It might actually be the year for Tulsa, but again, with Bridgeport looming out there, it's tough to think it could be the year for anybody in AA not named Bridgeport. At number 4, Bluefield. The Beavers are 5-1 with that 1 loss coming to Richlands, Virginia a few weeks ago. If you're familiar with Marshall football, that's where Devin Johnson played his high school ball, the running back from Marshall. And anyway, the Beavers are 5-1 at Oak Hill this week. At number 5, Chapmanville out of the Cardinal Conference. The Tigers are 7-0. Big game there this week as they host Mingo Central. That could kind of be a de facto Cardinal Conference championship game, couldn't it?
Could be that, or the next week when Chapmanville plays Tulsa.
Yeah. All right, and after Chapmanville is also undefeated, James Monroe. The Mavericks are 6-0, and they host Princeton this week. At number 7, Mingo Central, 5-1 at Chapmanville, like we mentioned. Number 8, Robert C. Byrd. They've kind of been flying under the radar as a good team, but they've got those 2 losses, so you're not mentioning them with the Bridgeports and the Fairmonts and the Tulsas and teams like that. Those 2 losses to Bridgeport and Fairmont, so, again, watch out for the guys from Clarksburg. It might be tough out
I would say so,
come playoff time. They're at Kaiser, so another test for them this week. It's not an easy trip to make, and Kaiser's probably smarting a little bit after those back-to-back losses the last couple weeks. And at number 9, Kaiser. So they are 5-2 and host Robert C. Byrd. And a tie at number 10, which we were talking a little bit about before we started recording. It'll get settled on the field this week. Lincoln and Roane County. Lincoln 5-1, Roane County 6-1. Both of them not rated last week, so we figure one of those teams will probably still be around when we do this next week, and the other might be also receiving votes. But the teams this week that are also receiving votes: Weir, Summers County, Herbert Hoover, and Wayne. And think Herbert Hoover's got to start getting some love in that poll if they can pull off the win this week at Wayne. In Class A in the Gazette Mail football poll this week, Magnolia holding steady at number 1, and hasn't been a whole lot of movement in any of the classes at the top of the polls. Magnolia also holding steady at number 1.
Yeah.
They are 10 first place votes out of 10, 7-0. Big game for them this week though. They go on the road to St. Mary's, last year's Class A runner-up.
Yep.
At number 2, Moorfield, 6-0. They're at East Hardy. That's a pretty big game too.
Yeah.
I've had people ask me, is East Hardy for real? Is East Hardy for real? Well, we'll find out this week. That's a tough task for them. St. Mary's is at number 3 this week. They are undefeated, and as we mentioned, they host Magnolia. At number 4, Wheeling Central, the Maroon Knights are 6-1, up 1 spot from number 5 last week. Not playing Friday, playing Saturday this week at St. John, Ohio. At number 5, Buffalo, the Bison kind of holding steady in the middle of the pack in Class A. Undefeated at Valley Fayette, which has in the past been kind of a big rivalry game, just because they're the only Class A teams within proximity of each other. But Greyhound's down a little bit. This year.
Yeah. Homeless.
And that's, we could do a whole show
really.
on that. We won't get into that this week, but maybe that can be a bonus episode sometime. At number 6 in Class A this week, South Harrison, the Hawks undefeated at 6-0, up from 8th place last week. They're at Tyler Consolidated on Friday. At number 7, Williamstown, they are 4-2 and at Work County this week. At number 8, Man, the Hillbillies 5-1, coming off that loss to Chapmanville, right?
That was
the loss, I thought.
And that was a
7-point game.
Yeah.
That was a pretty good effort for
late in the game score.
Yeah, so the Hillbillies, like I said, at number 8 in Class A this week, 5-1. They are at Sherman on Friday. At number 9, East Hardy, 5-1. They've got that game against Moorfield that we mentioned earlier. And at number 10 in Class A, Bishop Donahue, 6-1 at Steubenville, they host Steubenville Catholic this week. Other teams receiving votes in Class A, just 2 this week, Tug Valley and Pocahontas County. I alluded to it a couple times, so there really hasn't been a whole lot of movement, particularly at the top of the polls this season. What would you attribute that to? Because some seasons you see it's all over the place, and you get a year like this year, and it seems like teams have established themselves early and have not really slipped up since then.
You know what I kind of attribute it to is increased knowledge across the state. The fact that through the internet and increased coverage of high school football, writers and therefore voters on the poll know better about what is not in their own backyard, and I think information has been just better spread now, and we kind of know better what we're doing.
Plus, you look at Magnolia and Bridgeport. They're and Midland. They're really good teams. It's going to take an effort to beat any of the 3 of them.
Yeah.
And Magnolia's got a tough one this week, and they get by this one. I think probably pretty good from here on out.
Well, here's I think the best evidence of what I just said was that Magnolia was 4-6 last year.
Yeah.
And missed the playoffs. Mm-hmm. By the second week of this season, they were in a tie with Williamstown for number 1 in the poll because everybody in the state knew what they had coming back.
Right.
That's
right.
Well, good time to remind our viewers and listeners that we record this every week at Adelphia Sports Bar and Grill in the heart of downtown Charleston at 218 Capitol Street. Got some stuff coming up here at Adelphia. Every Monday night football, they have happy hour drafts and 60-cent wings during the game. Halloween party coming up on October 30th here. I believe that's the Friday before Halloween. Halloween's actually on a Saturday. There will be cash prizes and giveaways. If you're ever hungry during the day or just want to get out of the office, they've got 8 lunches under $8 on the menu, Monday to Friday, 11 to 2. Rib night and live music on Wednesdays, which today is Wednesday as we record this, so maybe hearing some tunes and eating some ribs later if I'm so inclined. Thursday, tomorrow night, ladies' night. It's half-price appetizers for everyone, ladies 2-for-1 drink specials. And Adelphia was just named the best wings in the valley for the 4th time in the last 5 years. And I didn't vote on that, but that's probably how I would have voted too, because the Adelphia wings are probably my favorite, not just in town, but around.
How do you get to vote in that contest, by the way?
I don't know.
Somewhere I can sign up for that.
I don't know. We might have to talk to Tracy here at Adelphia. He might be able to help us out. But yeah, if you're, like I said earlier at the top of the show, if you want to watch a game, grab a drink, get something to eat, this is the spot to do it in downtown Charleston at 218 Capitol Street. Moving on, though, Derek, you wrote a column this week the headline we had on it was, setting the field
Right.
for the Kennedy race. And we've alluded that it was getting close to that time. You can kind of start picking guys out and not necessarily slotting them in order, but you've got your eye on them, unofficial watch list, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Can you go through a little bit of how you come up with what you had in the column, and maybe we can get into some of the guys that you mentioned there? I know Cody Mitchell from Point Pleasant, somebody that we mentioned in past podcasts, but walk us through that.
Okay. Well, I've been hesitant to get into this, until this point in the season, but I think, with some teams only having 3 games left, I think it's time.
Your voicemail in your email inbox. Thank you for
Starting
waiting
to
until
fill up.
October.
Yes. But, unlike last year, what I was writing about was unlike last year when really by this point in the season we kind of had a 2-man race between Kayshawn Haley and Kentrey Greer from Capital and South Charleston respectively. This is a field that reminds me more of that from 2007 when Scott's Jordan Roberts won the Kennedy. I thought, we had Michael Scott, the quarterback, and Marcos Valentine, the receiver at Nitro. I voted Nat Valentine number 1 that year. I distinctly remember that. And Josh Jenkins was a senior at Parkersburg, a lineman.
Of course, Josh went on, played at WVU.
Yeah, and he was
one of the top recruits in the country.
Yeah, and he's the first person to ever win the Hunt Award as the best lineman in the state twice. Okay, I mean, so you had a mishmash, and then Jordan Roberts had a great playoff run with 399 yards rushing and 8 touchdowns in 1 game at Berkeley Springs, and that kind of tilted everything. I mean, it just wiped out everybody else. But okay, it's Jordan Roberts, and that's what catapulted him to that win. I think we're looking at a situation like that this year. That we've got Tyler Mayer at Roane County with 1,700 yards rushing, but are they going to make a playoff run or not? We don't know yet. Xavion Lawson down at Greenbrier East.
He's having a great season.
Great season. Another 1,700 yard plus guy already. They're 4-3. East making the playoffs for the first time since '98 would do him a heck of a favor as far as that. And we have Tyree Pratt at Capital. Greer is still at South Charleston. We have
Nunu Miller at GW is having a great season.
Is having a great season. That's what we were talking about with schedules. Mm-hmm. That's going to have to. Basically, more weight is going to be put on every one of his performances now through the end of the regular season in that pursuit. Cody Mitchell at Point Pleasant. We talked about the fact that look, I named him as the front runner for myself.
Sure.
Last week or maybe the week before. But do you see who Point Pleasant's playing this weekend? Ravenswood.
Yeah.
Ravenswood's 1-6 or something like that. I mean,
not being
tough.
in the MSAC, it's tough to schedule as an independent AAA team in that part of the state,
but that's going to hurt them.
Yeah, it's going to hurt. It's the fact of the matter. There's not really anything that we can do about it as voters, but we can't coddle a team or a player because it's Point Pleasant. We know their schedule is not going to be what a Capital or Wheeling Park or somebody.
Yeah, it's by the same metric, really. I think the biggest game, honestly, for the Kennedy race this week might be Jefferson at Fairmont Senior. Yeah. Here's why. Not a lot of people out of the Eastern Panhandle are going to see Christian Johnson, the wide receiver who won the Randy Moss Award last year at Jefferson, through the course of the regular season. They're going to make the playoffs, but here's the thing. They're going to Fairmont, which is a hotbed of media. Not Fairmont itself, but Clarksburg's right down the street. Morgantown's right up the street. There's a lot of voters right in that core area. And if Christian Johnson goes to Fairmont this weekend and has a big game, buddy, that plays into his favor.
I think it was
big time.
One day this week, I looked at you and said, if I'm not sold on anybody yet, but if you press me today to vote for the Kennedy Award, I might vote Christian Johnson number 1. Mm-hmm. Now, I have seen him. I saw him in the playoffs last year, first round game against Point Pleasant. He didn't disappoint. They lost that game, but he had a fantastic game. Brian, what are your thoughts on the Kennedy Award so far? Anybody we failed to mention? Saving Johnson from Wheeling Park, another one maybe there on
Dylan Tonkery?
Dylan Tonkery
from Bridgeport.
I'll ask you a question. I think you made a really good point that a lot of this is going to get settled moving on. It's really kind of wide open right now between anywhere 5 to 10, 12, 15 guys. Yeah. What if Chapmanville goes and wins the next 2 or 3 games and makes a deep run into the playoffs? I mean, I know you've been really big on Alex Berry all year.
Yeah.
Is that a possibility for him, you think?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. As much so as for Luke Presley at Tulsa.
Right.
As a matter of fact, I would say more so for Alex Berry because he's a quarterback.
Yeah.
And, so much more is put on a quarterback, and everybody realizes that. If a quarterback can guide especially a team that's, not one of the quote-unquote traditional powers deep into the playoffs, he's going to get a look. That's what happened with Roberts.
And I'll say someone else, and this is a bit of a reach. I don't think he has a realistic shot unless you kind of mentioned Bird flying under the radar, and I've seen a lot of good running backs this year. Been very fortunate too. And Juwan Jones-Wright is that is one of the most impressive kids I've seen run the ball a year. So, if they get hot and finish 8-2 and upset somebody in the playoffs, you never know that. But
exactly.
That speaks to your point. It's kind of wide open right now, I think.
You mentioned that Jefferson Fairmont game being big as far as potential Kennedy Award candidates. How about that GW Capital game?
I was just saying the same thing, yeah.
We mentioned Tyree Pratt. We've mentioned Nunu Miller, talking a little before the recording. Silas Nazario, the running back at Capital, has had 8 touchdowns called back on penalties this year. I'm not sure how many yards, but they haven't been of the 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 yard run varieties. He's having 30 and 40 and 50 yard runs called back. So, if you throw that in there, then maybe he's right there on the list. But the guys we mentioned, Miller and Pratt, if Miller's been running for right around 200 yards a game and multiple touchdowns, if he does that against Capital, I think he vaults way up.
Capital and Midland in back-to-back weeks.
Way up the list.
We're going to see Nunu Miller's test of metal.
It's there for him.
It's there for him to grab.
Yeah. But and same side of that, Tyree Pratt has a great game against GW. Beginning of the season, we'd be like, GW's okay, but this is the number 4 team in the state. These guys are rolling right now. So I don't think this is quite the pushover that it's been for Capital the last couple of years by any stretch. But a lot of big players around the state, a lot of big games. That'll just about do it for us this week. We can wrap up with some parting shots. Ryan, I know you've got one.
Yeah, I do.
On the our friends in the Cardinal Conference.
He hasn't been here for like a month, so
I've been busy in all 8 corners of the state.
So we had you at
see Martinsburg
Golf
Wheeling,
State tournament last week.
Yeah.
So I think we called you the Road Warrior last week. I didn't know if you were Hawk or Ham.
That's pretty good. I'm a mix between both of them. A couple weeks ago when Rick was here last, his parting shot concerned the MSAC and about how in the last couple of years it's been the top half and the bottom half and a big gap. I kind of looked at the Cardinal Conference over the last 2 seasons, and it's pretty much the anti-MSAC because what you have this year, I looked at all the teams going into Week 8 this year and last year. There are 3 teams that are the same. Mingo's 5-1, Poca's 0-7, and Hoover's 4-2. Even as we talked about, they missed the playoff.
Right.
Last year at this time, Chapmanville and Tulsa, who are at the top of the conference, were 5-8. They're 13-0 right now. Wayne, Sissonville, and Scott were 13-6 at this point last year, and as we know, Sissonville won their last 4, all made the playoffs. 6-13 right now. We're kind of talking about Hoover, and if 2 things that are kind of going to happen maybe, if Wayne misses the playoffs and Hoover gets in a 2-year span, 7 of 8 of the Cardinal Conference teams will have made a playoff appearance. Only 1 will have been there twice, Mingo, and only 1 missed it completely, Poca. That's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about parity, there it is, man. Yeah. Definitely. I like that. I really don't have much of a parting shot. The Kennedy stuff was kind of what I was thinking about. But, just to kind of pile on that a little bit, one thing I said that I'd like to emphasize again, it's really starting to get interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, with so many players, I think it's not just here. It's not just in North Central West Virginia. It's not just in either of the Panhandles or anything like that. There's good reason to keep an eye everywhere, to try to keep your eye everywhere, because there's a lot of good players right now that somebody's going to emerge. And
did we mention Savion Johnson earlier?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, I thought they had the most impressive win of the week last week in any class. 35-7 over Morgantown.
Definitely.
Just when you kind of worried about Wheeling Park after the loss to Brook, that was really impressive.
Yeah. Well, I guess my parting shot, kind of keeping in line when we were talking about the Kennedy. You had a big hand in helping get a lot of the other individual awards off the ground last year, so there's a lot more to consider for people that do podcasts about high school football now. Yeah. And I was thinking about the House Award, the J.R. House Award for the quarterback of the year in the state. Last year it was kind of Kentrey Greer to lose, and he did, and he won it. Comes back this year, you got to figure, okay, he's the favorite, and coming into the season, absolutely that's true. But halfway, 3/4 of the way through the season, there's probably 10 quarterbacks that could be in the mix for that. Just here, you got him and Tyree Pratt. You got the guy from Chapmanville that you mentioned, Garrett Gilkerson from Parkersburg South. Jefferson's got a really good quarterback. Stevie Hammond from Mingo Central. I mean, there's legitimately 7 or 8 guys, I think, that can still get their hands on this at the end of the year. And that's just that award. There's a running back award. There's wide receiver award. There's defensive back awards. There's, this is, it's a great thing having all these awards, but it's especially nice for us because it gives us some more.
Oh yeah, we'll get that should be something we'll get into the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, we might.
Make a list of those awards. I mean, to recap what they are. I mean,
go through them.
Sure. The quarterback of the year is the J.R. House Award. The running back is the Kurt Warner Award. The
C, Kurt Warner.
Kurt with a C. Randy Moss Award is for the wide receiver of the year. The Chuck Halley Award is the linebacker of the year.
That's going to be a good one this year, too.
I do, too.
There's probably 5
I think
linebackers
so.
that could claim being the best in the
Chris
state.
Camp at Cabell Midland's having a great year. Of course, you got Gay Trill at Huntington and Devin Adkins at Capitol. Those are just 3 right in our backyard that we know about. Who knows how many more we can throw on that list. The Carl Lee Award for the defensive back of the year. I think that's... Yeah, those are the... No. We got the special teams player of the year. Which... Fulton Walker.
There you go.
The Fulton Walker Award. There were so many. I mean, Chris Johnson from Clarksburg and I worked hard to get these together really think it's
sports editor at the Exponent Telegram.
Yeah. And we just think that it's something to shed more light on the best players in the state beyond just the Kennedy Award, the Huff and Hunt. And it's definitely going to be interesting for those awards in the next couple weeks too.
All right, I guess that about does it. Maybe that's some food for thought for you guys if you're out at the games this weekend or throughout the rest of the season. Of course, you can find everything we do high school football related online at wvhuddle.com. We're on Twitter at wvhuddle. We're on Instagram and Facebook, and you can just search West Virginia Huddle, WV Huddle, Gazette Mail High School Huddle. They'll all take you there. All of our other sports coverage online at wvgazettemail.com/sports. Find us on Twitter and Facebook there. I believe the Twitter handle is at Gazmail Sports. Facebook, I think just search Gazette Mail, and that'll get you there. At rpritt on Twitter, at It's Really DT. You can find me on there at Tom Bragg Sports. And I guess that'll about do it for this week, fellas. All right. Thanks for watching. See you next week.